Hello everyone, Prime here, and I hope you've had a great day. Hi-Rez recently released Chernobog on Twitter, his design, just a tiny few sentences about his lore and all of that stuff, so going to be covering his lore backstory and all of that good stuff, and seeing what's similar between what's been released and his actual lore. So, getting right into this, he's a hideous, dark, demonic-looking figure who only appears at night, and his design kind of gets this dark demonic aspects, but it's not exactly hideous. In fact, it could look quite similar to one of Thanatos' skins or Cronus' design. And the justification for that is that Hi-Rez wanted to make him still somewhat relatable to us. They didn't want to go with a completely ugly character. That's probably a similar justification as to why Hell isn't an ugly creature. And if they ever release Baba Yaga, why she won't be an ugly creature either. But he's also known as the Black God, or rather, Chernobog itself means the Black God. Now, usually any emotions that you consider to be negative are what Chernobog experiences pretty much all the time. So, in terms of his voice pack and his jokes, lines like that probably be edgy, but soft edgy. So maybe, Thanatos, Hell's Dark Stance, Apwash, that kind of theme, lines like that. As the world was created, Chernobog, god of darkness, was plagued by temptations, grief, and depression. Corrupted, he sought to rule the world and transformed into a black serpent. Sauron wasn't just going to let Chernobog take the earth just because the god was tripping, and slammed his hammer against his forge, creating a group of new gods, such as Dazbog, god of the sun, and Strigbog, god of the winds. Chernobog was getting busy, making a force of his own. The people that lived on the earth he saw and thought they were a pretty decent force, so he kind of corrupted men. Dazbog and Simalg, a creature of the hearth, checked up on the earth to see what was going on and found that most of the people of the earth were corrupted and part of Chernobog's army. They decided to depressingly leave and inform Savrong of all of this, and Savrong, knowing that war was inevitable, struck his own forge and gave weapons to his own army. Cherno's army was pretty powerful and drenched in darkness and was really going to go down with great light. Chernobog's corruption of man was so powerful that it gave them the ability to enter the heavens themselves. Chernobog's armies moved to attack the forge of Savrong. With no time to spare, Savrong created a chest and called upon his children gods to defend and take down Chernobog. The Black God was ultimately sealed away in the chest, Chernobog pleading for the lives of his children, men, and they were spared, but only on the condition that Chernobog would never entirely control the earth again. The earth was restored, half in daylight and half in darkness, which is the Slavic explanation for the day and night cycles. He does battle with Belbog, the god of light, for 2 seasons, twice per year, and can only move around and spread his influence during the night, which he rules, because he can. Now, you're probably wondering why Chernobog only pled for the lives of his children, humanity, rather than also pleading for his own life. But, you see, he existed before a lot of the gods that Savrong himself created. This is partially just because of how vital and how powerful his sheer presence is. Remember, he's darkness itself. Like Nox, his presence is somewhat untouchable, and even the person who would establish themselves as the ruler or the senior of the other gods pretty much had to operate around them, though this is to a lesser degree than Zeus had to operate around Nox. Nox didn't beg for the life of Hypnos. Her presence alone meant that Zeus couldn't chase Hypnos to punish him. However, Chernobog did end up begging for the lives of humanity, so that is the difference. And as far as the whole black serpent form, that's probably not going to be part of his kit in Smite. It might be part of his passive, but it doesn't look like Chernobog will be taking inspirations from that part of his lore. He's said to be in eternal battle with his nemesis, Belbog. To us humans, he's the cause of a lot of disasters, wrongs, chaos, and bad luck. Anytime anything bad happens to you, like you completely get destroyed in Smite, your PC crashes, you tell a disgustingly awkward joke that no one laughs at, or a car drives past on the road and you get drenched in water, well, that's all thanks to Chernobog, and he enjoys every second of your pain. Probably another reason as to why Hi-Rez had to make him somewhat relatable by making him look, pretty. Or prettier than he otherwise should look. There are other things about his character, but I don't want to take away too much from previous things I've said about him, so go ahead and check out some of my other videos on Slavic mythology for a bit more on generally what Chernobog tends to do. But, coming back to Chernobog with Smite, his class has pretty much been confirmed to be a hunter. He will be a hunter. And honestly, when I look at some of his early concept art, he's holding a lot of daggers or a lot of weapons that assassins tend to use, like Saket, Loki, characters like that. And I would have thought he'd be the game's first ranged assassin because, Hi-Rez has been experimenting with a lot of gods. And even the Guardian class has a ranged character, Sylvanas, and a unique ranged character because he has AoE basics. I figured that could have been the case, but no, he's a hunter, which if I sound disappointed at that, well, hunters aren't exactly my favorite class. I also had, little lore references and some proof on that front as to why I thought he could make a great assassin, but at the end of a little post that Hi-Rez linked with the teaser image of Chernobog, they pretty much abundantly state that Chernobog is going to be a hunter. More hunters! Yay? Now, an interesting thing about his Datamind kit is that whilst he's hidden inside of a wall, he can't be targeted by bots. So by bots, I'm assuming they mean things like not just minions, but any sort of objective on the map, and of course the Titan, and probably player-spawned minions and bots of that nature as well. Of course, in the story I was talking to you about earlier, he was controlling people on a mass scale. Almost every human that was alive on the planet at the time was pretty much introduced into Chernobog's army of darkness and chaos and super edginess. So that seems like a fairly nice lore throwback there. As far as what he'll contribute to the Smite story going forward, it's pretty interesting to see, because there's quite a lot of routes Hi-Rez could take with him. During the story, Nox saves Athena from a frost giant, and I do have problems with this, partially because Athena should be way stronger than some random nameless frost giant, but either way, Nox shows off her power and defeats this frost giant. Maybe that was the reason why Athena was even in that state to begin with. But why should Nox care about what happens to the Earth? Why would Ragnarok even affect Nox? According to Greek mythology or Roman mythology, she was in existence before the Earth was even created. She's a primordial deity. These things are simply just existing, but they shouldn't affect her too much, right? Even though we have established the fact that worshippers are the source of these gods' strength, there are a couple of issues with that. First off, if this really is the case that every single deity in Smite gains their power from worshippers, why is Fenris such a significant threat? There's no way that people would actually worship Fenrir in the story, because that's just madness. First and foremost, he was bound, and whilst the gods know of Fenris binding various different degrees, they seem to know about Fenris' existence at the very least. Would humans even necessarily be aware that Fenrir is a thing? Of course, those that live in the part of the world where Norse mythology is, of course, highly practiced, they might know, but someone who's living near Africa or, the Egyptian pantheon, people who would typically worship Egyptian gods, would they necessarily know, for instance? I doubt that very much. So Fenrir must be getting some other source of power. Maybe he's just innately that powerful and he's simply growing stronger for some other reason, but either way, his strength doesn't necessarily seem to be tied to worshippers. If that's the case, then it sets a precedent for other gods and goddesses not necessarily having to rely on worshippers for their power. That means that it could easily stand to reason that a primordial deity, or at least whether Nox is actually given the distinction of being a primordial goddess or not, such as Nox, would have a different source of power and maintain that power very differently to a god like, say, Zeus. With that said, and Chernobog being fairly similar to Nox in that they both resign over darkness and they have very similar circumstances because of that, there's plenty of ways Hi-Rez could go with Chernobog's story. They could make him the main villain of this new story arc very easily, making him want to take over the Earth. They could have him be sort of an ally in a sense, because he wouldn't necessarily want the Earth to be destroyed because he seems to love humans. And they could take the story in a interesting direction with him like that. I don't think that Chernobog would necessarily be anything of a good character, purely for what he represents, and he's considered to be objectively evil. but still, be pretty interesting to see what they do with his character. But those are just some of my thoughts. And of course, the lore and backstory of Chernobog. Are you really pumped for Chernobog's release, or do you think they should have started off with another Slavic god? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed, well, go ahead, leave a like. Helps me out a lot and motivates me to make more of these. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content just like this, and of course, until the next video, have a very good day. I've been Prime, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.